Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the monthly check you've been counting on your entire working life, the one you paid into for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years, has just been slashed by nearly a quarter. No warning, no negotiation, just gone. That is not a dystopian novel. That is not a fear-mongering headline. That is the cold, hard, mathematical reality that the United States government's own Congressional Budget Office officially confirmed in February of 2026. The Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is on track to be completely depleted by the year 2032. And when that happens, every single beneficiary in America, regardless of how much they paid in, regardless of their need, regardless of their contribution history, will face an automatic benefit cut of somewhere between 23 and 28%. Today, we are going to break down exactly what that means, how we got here, and most importantly, what you should be doing right now to protect yourself. The Social Security Act was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on August 14, 1935, in the depths of the Great Depression. FDR was staring at a nation where elderly Americans were retiring into poverty at catastrophic rates, where there was no safety net, and where the concept of a dignified retirement was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Every working American would contribute a small percentage of their paycheck into a shared pool through what we now call FICA taxes, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. In exchange, when they retired, they would receive a monthly benefit for the rest of their lives. Roosevelt himself understood that making it a payroll tax was a political masterstroke. He famously said, "With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program." He was right, for 90 years. But no one could have predicted what the American demographic landscape would look like in 2032. Here is where the math starts to get uncomfortable. When Social Security launched in 1935 and began paying out benefits in 1940, the worker-to-beneficiary ratio was extraordinary. For every single retired American collecting a benefit, there were roughly 42 workers paying into the system. The program was essentially swimming in surplus cash. By 1960, that ratio had dropped, but it was still a very healthy 5 workers for every 1 beneficiary. Today, in 2026, that ratio has collapsed to fewer than 3 workers for every 1 beneficiary. And it is still falling. These are now beneficiaries drawing from the trust fund. The demographic math is unforgiving, and it has been building toward this crisis for decades. Now let's talk about the trust fund itself, because this is where most people's understanding gets fuzzy. The Social Security Trust Fund is not just a pile of cash sitting in a government vault. The OASI, Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund currently holds approximately $2.3 trillion in assets, and the Disability Insurance Trust holds an additional $230 billion. But here's the thing. That money is not sitting in a checking account. By law, the Social Security Administration is required to invest those assets exclusively in government-issued special securities, essentially a form of U.S. Treasury bonds. The fund earns interest on these investments, roughly $58 billion annually at current rates. But the problem is that benefit payments are growing far faster than the interest income. As of this year, the projected deficit for the trust fund stands at $207 billion. And according to the CBO, that deficit is going to balloon to $525 billion by 2032, which is precisely when the fund hits zero. So how did we get to this point so fast? Because just a few years ago, the depletion date was projected to be 2034, then 2033, and now suddenly it's 2032. What happened? 3 specific events accelerated the timeline, and you need to understand each one. First, the Social Security Fairness Act, signed by President Biden in January of 2025. This legislation repealed 2 long-standing provisions, the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, which had historically reduced Social Security benefits for certain public sector employees, including many teachers, firefighters, and government workers. The intent was noble. These workers had been shortchanged. But the financial consequence was brutal. The third factor is inflation-driven COLA adjustments. The Social Security cost of living adjustment for 2026 came in at 2.8%, higher than expected, which sounds like good news for the roughly 71 million Americans currently receiving benefits, and in the short term, it is. The average monthly retirement check as of April 2026 is $2,081. A 2.8% COLA bump added about $56 per month for the average retiree. But every COLA increase also increases the long-term liability of the trust fund, because those higher payments compound year after year for the rest of each beneficiary's life. Higher than expected inflation driving larger cost of living adjustments was one of the three specific reasons the CBO cited for moving the depletion date forward. The program is caught in a brutal paradox. The very mechanism designed to protect retirees from inflation is simultaneously accelerating the fund's collapse. Now let's make this real. Let's put actual dollar figures on what a 23 to 28% benefit cut would mean for you, your parents, your grandparents, or anyone you know who is collecting or planning to collect Social Security. The average retirement benefit today is $2,081 per month. A 23% cut takes that down to roughly $1,602 per month, a loss of $479 every single month, or approximately $5,748 per year. And in certain states where Social Security represents the primary, or only, source of retirement income, that cut would be genuinely devastating. This is not an abstraction. This is a financial emergency in slow motion. Here is the one thing the media often gets wrong about this story, and it is critical that you understand this clearly. Social Security is not going to disappear. It is not going bankrupt in the way a company goes bankrupt. When the trust fund is depleted, Social Security will still exist. It will still pay out benefits, but it will only be able to pay out what it collects in real time from payroll taxes. The CBO estimates that once the trust fund hits zero, incoming FICA tax revenue will be sufficient to cover only about 72 to 77% of scheduled benefits. The government cannot legally pay more than it collects without trust fund reserves to draw from. So the cut is automatic. It's not a choice Congress will be asked to make. It will simply happen by operation of law unless Congress acts before 2032. And right now, Congress has not acted. Which brings us to the reform debate, and there are really only a handful of levers available to fix this problem. The first and most straightforward option is raising or eliminating the payroll tax cap. Right now in 2026, the FICA wage cap, the maximum amount of income subject to the 6.2% Social Security payroll tax, sits at $184,500. That means a worker making $184,500 and a hedge fund manager making $10 million pay exactly the same total dollar amount into Social Security. Raising the cap to $250,000 or eliminating it entirely would dramatically expand the program's revenue base. The Penn-Wharton budget model has modeled exactly this scenario. It is politically controversial. High earners would pay significantly more, but it would meaningfully extend the program's solvency without cutting a single benefit. The second major reform option is raising the full retirement age. Currently, Americans can begin collecting reduced Social Security benefits at age 62, and full benefits kick in at age 67 for anyone born after 1959. Several proposals in Congress have suggested gradually raising the full retirement age to 68, 69, or even 70, to reflect the reality that Americans today are living significantly longer than they did in 1935. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has even floated a concept called the six-figure limit, capping the maximum annual Social Security benefit, which currently can reach over $100,000 per year for high-earning couples, to redirect more of the system's resources toward lower and middle-income retirees. The third option, and the one most economists consider the most painful but most effective, is a direct increase in the FICA payroll tax rate itself. Right now, workers and employers each contribute 6.2% of wages for a combined total of 12.4%. Raising that rate by even 1 percentage point to 13.4% combined would generate substantial additional revenue. The Wharton budget model has specifically modeled a combination of a 1-point payroll tax increase, a higher taxable maximum of $250,000, and an adjusted COLA formula using the chain CPI rather than the standard CPIW. This blended approach, according to their analysis, could significantly close the $25 trillion 75-year actuarial deficit that the program currently faces. But every one of these solutions requires something Washington has been spectacularly bad at producing in recent years: political courage and bipartisan consensus. So what does all of this mean for you personally, right now, today? The 2032 is not far away, and the 71 million Americans currently depending on Social Security, plus the hundreds of millions more who will depend on it in the future, are counting on Washington to find that same courage again. Whether they will or not is the $25 trillion question.